Today on Professor Tom's Philosophy in 10, Self-Regarding and Other Regarding Virtues. Aristotle famously argued that each virtue should be considered a mean between two extremes of excess and deficiency. A courageous person will be neither too timid nor overly brash and foolhardy. Generosity is also a virtue, but it too is a mean, falling between parsimony and profligacy. Aristotle was definitely onto something here. You can easily come up with your own examples. It has also been observed that what is virtuous in one context often is not virtuous in another context. Deception is called for in athletics and in warfare, which might help explain why military metaphors are rife in sport, but deception is generally not a virtue in a marriage. These points do not exhaust what we can say about the virtues, however. There's another useful distinction to be made, one that runs through much of our moral and political discourse, and that's the distinction between self-regarding virtues and other regarding virtues. Here's a fun exercise. List as many virtues as you can. Here's a list that one of my classes came up with. Courage, generosity, temperance, wisdom, thoughtfulness, compassion, intelligence, patience, kindness, honesty, modesty, love, prudence, strength, faith, hope, charity, humility, persistence, confidence, sincerity, and being forgiving. That is quite a list. Notice that the students tended to gravitate to virtues that are generally considered morally positive. The tendency to consider only morally positive virtues may be a result of the way that the question was posed. I don't know. I did ask the question in a very general way. I merely asked them to give me some examples of virtues. However, when I asked them to give me examples of virtues for a business person, the nature of the list changed quite a bit. Here's that list. Knowledgeable, strategic, aggressive, energetic, honest, fair, hard-nosed, tough, unstoppable, committed, persuasive. I then asked the students about virtues in the sport of chess boxing. In case you don't know what chess boxing is, it's a sport in which the two fighters alternate rounds of speed chess and boxing. The fight ends when there's either a checkmate or a knockout. And here are the virtues that my students associated with the sport of chess boxing. Toughness, being smart, being knowledgeable, ruthless, remorseless, committed, unstoppable, and well-trained. Lastly, I asked the students about the virtues of parenting. What would make a parent virtuous? Here's the list my students came up with for this. Caring, loving, kind, patient, knowledgeable, fair, supportive, always there. Now this exercise, listing all of the virtues you can come up with, is really an eye-opener. Who knew that there were so many different virtues? And as extensive as these lists are, they don't even come close to exhausting the virtues. Even so, they provide enough data to work with. What patterns can we find in these lists? Well, first, we might notice that what counts as a virtue seems to be context-dependent. What might be a virtue in business or sport or warfare might not be a virtue in the context of a family, for example. Second, we might also notice that some of these virtues seem to involve relationships between people, while others seem to focus on only one person. And it's this distinction that I want to look at in this video. Take the virtue of being fair, for example. Although it certainly makes sense to say that you should always be fair to yourself, and sometimes people really need to hear that, for the most part, when we talk about fairness, we usually are talking about fairness in one person's treatment of another person, or in their treatment of other people. The same pattern holds for being loving, being kind, being patient, being supportive, being compassionate, having faith, and many other virtues on our lists. We can say that we should love ourselves, be kind to ourselves, be patient with ourselves, and so on, but all of these virtues usually involve one person's treatment of another person. For this reason, we can call these virtues the other regarding virtues. Now note that the other regarding virtues are not all of the love, kindness, compassion sort. In contexts in which being ruthless is a virtue, we can also talk about being ruthless with ourselves, but more especially, we talk about being ruthless with other people. A ruthless business person is ruthless to customers and competitors and maybe even other stakeholders as well. A ruthless defensive back in American football is ruthless with players on the other team, but not with players on their own team. So the other regarding virtues are quite varied, but our analysis so far suggests that they can be subdivided into two categories. There are those other regarding virtues of the love, kindness, compassion sort, and there are those of the ruthless sort. What's the difference between these two categories? Well, the virtues in the first category focus on the well-being of the object of the virtue, while those in the second category do not. So let's call the former, that is the virtues of the love, kindness, compassion sort, let's call them positive other regarding virtues. And let's call the latter, the virtues of the ruthless sort, let's call those negative other regarding virtues. By contrast with the other regarding virtues, self-regarding virtues have to do only with the self. These include things like wisdom, intelligence, courage, temperance, and being well-trained. Now, we're all good philosophers, and as good philosophers at this point, we should probably ask ourselves, are some of these virtues better or more important than others? Virtues don't come singly in human beings, so perhaps we should instead ask, are some collections or sets of virtues better than others? Consider two people. Let's creatively call them Person A and Person B. Both try to live virtuous lives, but Person A values courage, wisdom, temperance, and intelligence over compassion, love, and kindness, while Person B is the exact opposite and values compassion, love, and kindness more than courage, wisdom, temperance, and intelligence. That is, Person A values self-regarding virtues over the other regarding virtues, and Person B values other regarding virtues over self-regarding ones. So which person has the better approach? Which set of virtues is superior? And as an aside, you might think that this little thought experiment oversimplifies things. Are any actual people really like Person A and Person B? Probably not so starkly, but surely you have run into people who lean to one side or the other, and I would bet that you have at least occasionally met people who lean pretty far one way or the other. The same is true not just of people, but of cultures as well. There were certainly compassionate people in the Athens of Socrates' time, for example, but the historical evidence seems to show that self-regarding virtues were more valued than other regarding virtues at that place and time. Plato argued for four primary virtues on which he based his theory of the soul and his theory about the best form of government, and these four primary virtues were courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice. Note that at least the first three of these are all self-regarding virtues. In Christian traditions, by comparison, the 7 deadly sins are often set against 7 capital virtues: chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility. And note that this list includes a mixture of self-regarding virtues, chastity, temperance, diligence, and humility, and other regarding virtues, charity, patience, and kindness. Some Christian philosophers have argued that the inclusion of the other regarding virtues marks this list as superior to Plato's. Now, I want to end this video by applying some of these distinctions to a current moral issue, that of masking during an epidemic. Arguments about masking have at times been intense. There are those who have argued for mask mandates which require members of a community to mask, where that community might be workers at an office or a factory, or students at a school, or staff and patients at a hospital, or maybe even a whole geographic area like a city or a state or a country. The most common justification given in defense of such mandates is based on other regarding virtues. The idea here is that we're all in this together, and so we should act in ways that minimize significant known harms to others that our behaviors might cause. By comparison, the most common arguments against mask mandates are based on self-regarding theories of virtue. Freedom is a political virtue, and freedom as a political virtue usually means that I get to do what I want to do within broad limits. There's a reason why those opposed to mask mandates are more than occasionally seen carrying the Gadsden flag, which says, "Don't tread on me." That expresses a self-regarding virtue. Now, notice that the opposing sides in this debate about morality, individual rights, and civic duties base their views on different sets of virtues, different assessments of which virtues are more important or more fundamental, the self-regarding ones or the other-regarding ones. Such debates are thus, as a practical matter, unlikely to be productive until those differences in underlying assumptions are made explicit. There is no doubt that individual freedom as a political virtue is one of the greatest ideas humanity has ever had, but it seems equally worthy of our humanity to be concerned about and to act out of compassion and regard for the well-being of the people around us. Since, as a practical matter, some common ground must be found between these two groups, and I'm assuming that simply imposing one person's or one group's view as a matter of force and privilege is not a good solution. So since, as a practical matter, we need to find common ground in this and similar moral and practical debates, I here offer the modest suggestion that shifting the discussion away from the policies themselves to the underlying views of the virtues that motivate the different positions wouldn't be a bad thing to try.